All right, so here we go. This will be the last of the new information that I have for you folks. Week 17 of our course here, and for those that aren't in the course, this will just be an introduction to the Epson Graphical User Interface. So we've been doing a lot of work with the Epson Scara robots and now the Epson 6-axis robots, and primarily working with the RC Plus software or the Spell Plus software and the RC7 simulation environment. So here we go, graphical user interfaces. So as a reminder, the work we're doing right now will be in reference to the 6-axis robot. We started out with the SCARA robot, the Selective Compliance Articulated Robot Arm or Assembly Robot Arm. And now we're working in the 6 axes. So that's just a leftover slide showing the 6 joints that we work with this robot. All right, a couple of things I want to talk about just a little bit. Project versus program. This came up from one of your classmates. If all you're doing is writing some code and you're just staying within that main routine, we just call that's really just a program. That's all that is. Now, that program really does get saved as a project. What I mean is the program code, that main program, could have anywhere from 5 lines of code to 500 lines of code. But in addition to that, you guys also have to give me a file with the robot points in it, right? And now, starting this week, you're going to give me a file with what's called a GUI form. And then on top of this, we have things like subroutines. So what really starts to happen is, as you start to build all of these different components and they all kind of link together, this is actually a little slide I use on a different presentation, but they all kind of link together. So one program can call a subroutine or a subprogram that can call another subprogram that can look at a different set of points than the original main program did. So when I think about this, I always think about, let me just erase this for a second. Actually, I can get rid of that the quickest by just deleting out here for a second, discard those, and then just jump back in. So I always think about, if I'm just looking at one thing, one main code and the points associated with it, it really sticks within itself. It's within one box. But as soon as I have a number of subprograms, subroutines that call other routines, that bounce back and forth in the main, that may call different sets of points based upon different things that we're doing, I start to think of that more like a project. Everything in Epson is saved as a project, but I really like to think that it's more global in picture, and instead of being more local in focus. So I mean, program kind of resides in one set of points and one set of code, and the project has lots of other pieces. It has GUI forms, it has multiple sets of points, it has routines and subroutines that we're going to go. So I just like to mention that, the difference between project and program. They're all Epson projects, but really some of them are much more involved than just one set of points and one set of code. All right, now why is this important? Well, what we're going to talk about this week are what we call operator interfaces. And there are several terms that we use to define what the interface between a human and a machine. Probably my favorite down here is an HMI, a human machine interface. So if you're working in the world of like PLCs, industrial controls, things like that, you're going to see things that look like this up here. This is an HMI screen, right? It's a human machine interface, which is to say the human can come in and touch a button, and that button is going to create some activity. It could turn on a motor, a conveyor belt, open a valve, could do a lot of different things. Well, that's really no different than a graphical user interface. Graphical user interface is exactly that. We use screen-based graphics to allow the user access to make changes to what's going on with the machine. And in the case of a robot, maybe I have a robot that in some cases has to weld a certain shape, and in other cases has to weld a different shape. Maybe it's fixtured up in the same fixture, and all the human has to do is come over here and press the appropriate button for whatever shape they need the robot to weld on. So whether we call it a graphical user interface, a human-machine interface, they really do mean the same thing. And then an operator interface terminal, it's still the same thing. If you get into the real icky details about what the difference is between these things, some people may say, well, an operator interface terminal, that actually doesn't necessarily involve a touch screen. That might involve a screen, with an LCD here, but maybe these are physical buttons underneath that screen that the user is going to press. And sure, whether it's a physical button or it's a or if it's a screen-based button, or if it's the handle on a screwdriver, it is still the interface between the human and the machine that we're doing. So lots of different terms that they really, at the end of the day, they really do mean the same thing, HMI, GUI, and OIT. And so don't be surprised if you see something like this on the final exam, if you see something like this on a quiz or on a worksheet. Just kind of know that they are the same thing, but it is important to know what these different acronyms stand for. And if nothing else, to at least know that they all mean it's an interface between a human and a machine. All right, so what we're going to really concentrate on this week is the Epson GUI builder. When we get into the GUI builder, you're going to see all kinds of neat stuff up here, but the GUI builder allows us to create that interface. So here is my graphical user interface that I'm actually working on creating right here. This is a little screen that will pop up when I run my program, and then maybe I can hit a button and the robot can trace a rectangle, and if I hit a different button, the robot traces a square. But there's lots of other things I can do. I can put, indicator LEDs on here that would light up when different things happen. I can put text boxes, I can put radio buttons, check boxes, and I always kind of like to define the difference between buttons and radio buttons. Buttons look like this. They're usually rectangular, square, or even sometimes round in shape. And when I press on that button, that signifies something. It pushes a 1 into the system somewhere and tells something to happen, right? A radio button actually looks like an LED. And the reason why they call it a radio button is if you look at like old school radios with presets on them, if I have preset 1, preset 2, preset 3, when I press preset 3, if preset 1 was on, it will turn off and preset 3 will turn on. And if I press preset 2, then preset 3 will turn off and preset 2 will turn on. So radio button is exactly that. Only one of them is going to be activated at a given time, but they're kind of like presets. So this could be routine 1, routine 2, and routine 3. And whichever one I select, that's the one that's going to run. I can't press more than one at a time. It's going to react to whatever one was pressed last. Check boxes, which look a little different. Check boxes usually are square in nature, and when you press on them, they get a little check. And you can, in that case, have multiple check boxes activated at the same time. And text boxes, where I might even include on the text box, where I want to set, maybe I want to, in the text box, I want to type in, how long I want the robot to run. I want the robot to run 60 cycles, or I want the robot to run for 5 minutes. So the text box allows me to enter some data, hit enter, and see what happens. So I've got indicators, which are just basically little lamps, right? That's all your indicators are, is they're just little LED lamps that would light up when certain things happen. I've got my radio buttons that when I press those, only one gets activated. They're kind of like radio presets. I've got my text box or my text field where I can actually enter data from a keyboard. And then I have my check boxes. And my check boxes can do something similar to the radio buttons, but in this case, I can check multiple of them, right? I could have, extra cycle checked. I want to run an extra cycle once I'm done. I could have, delay between, checked. Maybe I don't have delay if it's checked, but both things could be active instead of just one being active. GUI forms. So all of those things I was just talking about are located right here. So this is actually your button. This is just a text field, and I can't see what all these are. This is going to be your check box right here. This is going to be your radio button. This is going to be your text box. This is like a list box and a combination box. There's all kinds of stuff along here. But they're all things that I can put onto my screen right here. And as I build that graphical user interface for them to interface to the robot. Now remember, we're doing this in the simulated world, but do remember that in the real world, I want, when that rectangle goes, I want it to trace out the rectangle with the robot or trace out the square depending on what I hit. All right, now the GUI forms. This is where it gets a little bit messy. When you look at our program files, we still have our main code. Every time we write code, we're going to have a main program file in there that we're going to run. But now we're going to get what's called a GUI form. And this is where we're actually creating that graphical user interface. The GUI form is in this folder. That's where you're going to see, when you go into that folder, that's where you're going to see the screen. That GUI form is really that screen that we're generating, right? But that GUI form is going to then generate some GUI code. And so when you send me your program this week, you not only have to send me your robot points, right? You got to send me these, but you also have to send me your main code and your GUI code. And then, so I know what the heck it is that you're actually up to with this particular program. But when I create that GUI form, what's actually going to happen is it's going to generate some GUI code. So in this particular case, what I did was I had a button, and when someone clicks that button, the function is actually GUI form rectangular button click, right? It would quit the square routine and execute the rectangular routine. So this is a quit command, and this is an execute command. And so that's actually going to go call inside the main program the rectangular routine. And if I do the opposite one, right, if I click on the square button, then I'm going to quit the rectangular routine and I'm going to execute the square routine. And I can do lots of stuff, right? I can start the robot, I can pause the robot, I can continue, I can do all kinds of things. I can enter, text as far as run 5 times, run 10 times each time I click this button, whatever I want to do. I'm going to keep it simple for this week, but this will give you some good, at least a good opportunity to play with the code a little bit. Some additional resources. I do need to show these to you real quick. Let me discard my annotations for a second here. There's really 2 resources that I have on the website that you're going to want to at least have access to. Let me see if I can find them here. Where are they? So the first one is the oh no, I need to go to Epson. I'm in the wrong folder there. The industrial engineering, and I really wanted the Epson. All right, there's Epson Robotics right there. So the first one you're going to want to download that I'll have on the website for you is the GUI Builder. So this is GUI Builder 5.0, and it's just a manual for using the GUI stuff, right? But it actually does have a walkthrough, and we're essentially doing similar to this first builder tutorial. Ours will be a little bit different, but it'll be very, very similar. And actually, I might even just use this chunk of code rather than doing the init routine, just to make it even easier on us. So I'll actually keep that handy so I can do that. But it actually walks you through the steps of how I would build a GUI, and this is how I do it to this day. I'm going to pick a little bit different route. I think the one that they do is like start and stop the robot. I'm going to pick between 2 different paths for the robot is what I'm going to do. All right. So that's what we'll be up to. So, and then the other one that you're going to always want to have access to, and I think you guys already do, other than the GUI Builder manual, is your Spell Plus programming language manual. And you should already have access to that. And if not, I will post that on the website again. But Spell Plus programming language manual, the reason why we like that is, let's say I want to know what is the execute command, right? I could actually type it in, search for it in here, and find it. Or if I wanted to find out, what is how's the command for wait work, or how's the arc command work? I could type whatever it is I want to look up in here, right? I could type in arc, and I can find out there. Well, there's arch, so there's arch and there's arc, and I find out that arc moves the arm in a circular interpolation. And great, that's going to work out. And guess what? That's true for both SCARA, and that's also true for 6-axis. All right, so now what we're going to do is we'll open up our Epson software, and we're gonna build this first GUI is what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and get started here. So I will go into my Epson RC Plus. And again, it takes at least a second or 2 for that software to open, so we'll wait for it to open here. And okay, I don't need the tips. I've already got some GUI stuff going on in here that I've been playing with, but I want to start from scratch. So you guys are going to come in, you're going to start from scratch as well. I'm going to go to Project, New. And I'm going to call it GUI. And I know I already got a GUI one in there. I'm just going to overwrite it is all I'm going to do. So let me explain what I did again there. I did Project, New. A lot of times we've been coming in here, we've been just doing, a new file, because we maybe been working in our same project or whatever. But this time we want a whole new project. So I'm going to call that new project GUI. Project new project name is GUI. It says already exists. Do you want to overwrite it? Sure. I'm going to delete out my old project GUI. Now when I come into this code, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define, let me see what I had a plan of attack on this. Create a new main project. We did that. Create two subroutines within this project. They're going to be called rectangle and square. Okay. So what we'll do then is in here, we're going to create a function, and we'll call that function rectangle. And then we'll create another function, and we'll call that function square. So all of this is going to reside in our main code. And then I'm actually going to make it even a little simpler. Rather than doing the init robot stuff, I'm actually going to grab this little chunk of code that they did here for their main code, just from the motors on and down. And I'm going to paste that into my my rectangle code here. So motor on, and then I'll go from motor on, I'll go into a do loop. I'll go to 0.0, I'll wait. I'll go to 0.1, then I'll wait. Then I'll loop, and then I'll end. All right, that looks good. I guess I don't need two ends then, huh? All right, and then on the square, I'll do something very similar. I'll just grab that chunk of code again. Motor on. Paste that chunk of code in there again. Except this time, when you guys do it, you're going to have to, at a minimum, you're going to have 4 points. I'm not going to actually program in the rectangle and the square. I'm going to let you guys figure that out for the lab. But for this one, I'm going to do, instead of 0.0 and 0.1, I'm going to do 0.2 and 0.3 for the square. So I've got two functions that I'm calling from here. And as usual, save and save often. I'm going to go to save all files. And when you save all files, that saves everything inside the program. Now what I want to do is I want to go into my robot and I want to teach at least 4 points. I want to teach them different. So if I click on rectangle, I can tell that it's executing that code. And if I click on square, I can tell it's definitely executing a different chunk of code. When you guys do this again, you'll actually have a rectangle and a square in your program, and you'll make that run. I'm going to go ahead and go to my simulator, bring that up, and I hope, I've been grading some Scala work for a different class, so I hope I got the 6-axis open right now. I think I do. We may have to change robots if I don't. That's easy enough. The only thing that stinks about changing robots, of course, is it resets the, let's hit OK, yes. It resets the controller, and it takes a little while for it to boot up, right? Yeah, and so this actually shows you what I'm kind of looking for, is maybe do a rectangle and a square. So I can see that you've got both of them in there. For my 2D layout right now, I'm going to delete those. I don't need those in there. I'm not actually going to trace out the rectangle and the square, so I'm going to remove both of those. So they're both gone now. And I'll go back to my 3D view, and I can see my robot. And I should grab my mouse. That's what I should do. There we go. There we go, much simpler. And let's just kind of look at where Mr. Robot is. He looks pretty good there. Just a nice view. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to teach some points is all I'm going to do. And I want to make sure that I can tell that these are definitely, different points. I don't want there to be any confusion. For you guys, trace a rectangle or square, it's going to be obvious if you got the right one. So I'm going to go to move this guy around. I'm going to jog him around, and I'm going to go over to here. And I'm just going to kind of do a number like this, kind of put him over here, and I'm going to call this 0.0. Teach it. Yep. And then I can minimize that for a second, go back into my robot, and let's move him a little bit further now, maybe this way. So I'm kind of on this side. It's pretty obvious where I'm at. I'm way over here somewhere, right? We'll call this 0.1. And then for the other two, I'm going to slide all the way around, and so it's pretty obvious that I changed dramatically between my rectangle and my square movement, right? So I'll move this guy way over here now, and I might even move this joint up a little bit just to be even more obvious that this is a different point. This will be point 2, teach it, and then maybe we'll go even just a little further and maybe give it a little bit more action just to kind of make a little bit of interest in it at least, so there's something to see. And we'll call this point 3, I guess. So for me, it doesn't matter a whole lot. I just need a couple of points for each of my routines, so I definitely know when I'm executing my my rectangle routine, point 0 and point 1 are going to look a lot different than point 2 and point 3. So now I can go into those robot points if I want to look at them, and I can see I've got 0, 1, 2, and 3 all set up in there, and they are definitely much different. You can see your X's, are really big, and now your X's are really small. And so I definitely have significantly moved the robot from side to side in doing this. All right, now here's where it's going to get interesting. This is where we're going to get into our GUI builder. All right, so right now all we've done is the main code, and we've got our simulated robot here, and everybody's happy. Now, as we kind of scroll across, this is where our robot manager is. We've got some other things in here, all kinds of stuff. I go over far enough past my simulator, I actually get to my GUI builder. When I get into my GUI builder, this is the screen that you're going to see when you click on GUI builder. All right, you can see right now there's nothing in my GUI folder. There's no forms yet because I haven't created any, and there's also no code up here for my GUIs yet. So what I need to do first is create a new GUI form. The new GUI form is where we're actually going to create what that screen looks like. That's really what it is. It's like a form. It's like hey, what do you want to do? Check this box, or put something into this text box, or whatever it is. So I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call it Form 1. I'm going to be real creative on my naming here. I'm going to call it Form 1. You'll notice as soon as you do that, you actually do get a form in here now, Form 1 under the GUI folder. Okay. Now in this form, and I think I can move them a little, I can make them a little bit bigger. I try to keep them pretty small if I can. In here, I'm going to create some things, right? I want to create a few buttons, and I want to be able to maybe activate the rectangular code versus the rectangle code versus the square code. All right, so in my form, I'm going to go from over here, I'm going to go over to new button. And there I'm going to grab and I'm going to create a button. I'm just going to kind of center it up. And you can move it around. Once you create it, you can move it around, right? And it also is going to bring up the properties menu over here on the right. So I can drag this over maybe a little bit. Might even just iconify this. There we go. Make it a little easier to work with there. Now in here, this is where you kind of want to name these things in a convention that makes sense. So button 1 is probably not the best name. I'm going to call it rect button. That's not the best name either, I don't think, but that'll work. That to me means rectangular button, right? And then under text, this is what's going to show up on the physical button itself. So I'm going to call this rectangle, and I'm going to capitalize it. And when I hit enter, you see it'll actually show up here, right? And now I'm pretty happy with that button. Looks good. I'm going to create another button, new button, and this one's going to be square. And so this one, where it says name, instead of button 1, I'm going to call it SQU button. Okay. And then down here, I'll call this square. Okay, and I hit enter, and it shows up. And now this is where people get sometimes a little bent out of shape because one's a little wider than the other, one's not a little wider. So you can always look, the height is, I can make the height whatever I want. If I want to make the height 50 on both of them, and maybe make the width something easy to remember, like 150. So I got 50 and 150. It's an easy way to do it. And then I can do the same thing on this one, 150, and then go up to where the width, or the height should be 50. Boom. Now those two buttons are identical. And you can move them around and get them so that they're perfectly in a line, and you feel pretty good about that. Now, what actually happens with these buttons though is they need to be linked to do something. So what you need to do is you need to double click on that button, and it's going to give you the function. It's like its own function now, and you can actually see, you actually under your program files now, in addition to your main code, you actually have your Form 1 code up here now as well. So now Form 1 is like a subroutine that we're looking at it to see what's coming from it. And it's got some interesting stuff. So right now I know I'm in my rectangular one, which this is why I like naming the button something that makes sense. Rect button means I'm probably rectangular, right? So I'm gonna, first of all, to make sure things work right, I want to quit the square routine. You see, as soon as I hit say quit, it brings up all the different things. So I'm going to quit square, and I want to execute, XQT, I want to execute the rectangle. Now, why do you do that? Well, the reason you do that is because, as you can see, when I execute rectangle, I can't also be executing square. I can't be running the two at the same time. I'm either welding in rectangle shapes or I'm welding in square shapes. Maybe in this case I have a fixture, and in that fixture I can put a box that I'm going to weld that is 12 by 12. Or I can, in the same fixture, put a box that I'm going to weld that's 12 by 24. Well, one is a rectangle and one is a square. And I just need to select which one I put in there, and then the robot will know to go around and weld the appropriate one, right? So I've got quit square, execute rectangle. That's what I'm going to do with this guy. I feel pretty good. I'm going to hit save. I've done a little bit of work. I can close that form out. And that's what this guy's done now, is he actually has got a click event where he's going to execute that function that we just created. And remember what that function is. That function is to quit the square routine and execute the rectangle routine. Now, if I go into the next one, if I go into square, now you see it's building onto that form. It's giving me what the other button is going to do. Well, if the rectangle button quit square and executed rectangle, it's pretty obvious that this one's going to quit rectangle, right? And it's going to execute square. That's what we want to do with it. You might say, well, God, now I don't know what the heck you're up to there. Just remember, this isn't real rocket science. I was going to say rocket surgery. That's a combination between brain surgery and rocket science. It's not a difficult thing. Imagine these as just inputs, right? I've got an input to execute square. I'm going to hit save real quick. So when someone hits this square button, what's going to happen is it's going to go into the main code and it's going to say, look, I want to execute the code that's in square, which means I'm going to go to a different set of points than if I would have hit the button that says rectangle, in which case I'd have gone to this set of points. That seems to make perfect sense. Another thing that you can do is you can add some labels. So I'm going to draw this kind of nice and big. I may have to move it around, but I'm going to call this, instead of label 1, and you got to kind of go over to this thing over here where it says text. Instead of label 1, I'm going to call this weld path is what I'll call it. I'll just call it robot path. That's what I'll call it. So I called it robot path. There, it's up there. Now, if you want to change the font size, you got to kind of go into here and find the font. It's a little clunky, but remember what it's doing for you is it's actually building all of the code for you, so you don't have to necessarily build all that code. And you can also center it. You can probably find something down here somewhere where it says top left. Maybe I want to say middle center, right? And now it looks pretty nice. And if I want to center it up myself, I can probably put it like that. And now I've got a really nice looking GUI interface for what I'm going to do with my robot. Now it's important to note, you also have to double click on this guy, and he's going to bring up his own stuff. You can make it so that if somebody clicked on that label, it could do something. Like it could quit all if you wanted to. You could quit rectangle, quit square, quit everything. For me, I'm just using it as a label, so I'm not going to make it do anything. I'm just going to have the function end at that point and save my GUI file. But the nice thing is, now what I have is when somebody goes to run this program, what it's going to do is it's going to actually pull up this form. And depending on which button they hit, that's what's going to determine whether I route that robot in a rectangle or square. Now, remember, I didn't actually create a rectangle or square. You guys are going to have to do more points and do a little bit more jogging of the robot. I just created two different sets of points. And I'm calling one rectangle, which is a line over in this area, and calling the other one square, which is a line on the other side of the work cell, right? But whether you're doing, you can do it for whatever you want. You can do it for arcs, you can do it for any of that stuff. So now I'm going to go back to my main code. I think I'm looking pretty good. So I've got my rectangle function, my square function. Those all appear to be pretty good. I don't think I need anything in my main at all, to be honest with you. I didn't even init the robot. The reason why I didn't need to init the robot is I just turn the motor on and I just run through. So now I didn't define what the speed was, the force, the XL, decel, so all those are going to be default values, which is fine, but in the real world, we'd probably want to define those a little bit more deeply. I'm going to hit save all files, make sure everybody's happy there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that robot up again so we can actually see the robot. And I kind of like to be able to see my windows behind the scenes here a little bit too. So there's my robot. And he looks pretty happy there. Nice happy little robot. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to run. Let's see if this builds. And it built. That's a good sign. Now this is an important thing. Everything we've done up till now, when you go to the run window, has been what we call a function. And we've always gone to the main function. We've always started the main function. We're going to do something different this time. What you're going to do is instead of running a function, you're going to run a form. Why? Because that's what you're doing. You actually have created a form, and that form is what you want to see when you go to run the robot. So when I go in here now and I go to start, what you're going to see is you're going to see that form pop up. So that form popped up right here. All right, let me actually close out of here for 1 second and make this a little smaller too. All right, start, yes. All right, there's my form. Now when I hit rectangle, what should happen, we'll see if it does it here, is I should go over to a set of points. It's going to go all the way over to the other side, and it's going to go between 2 points. There's point 1, point 2, point 1, point 2. Now the neat thing about this though is when I hit square, what should happen? It should go all the way to the other side and go to a completely different set of points. So I hit square, and now it's actually going to a completely different set of points. And remember that we're doing this in the virtual world right now, but there's absolutely no reason why we can't do this with the robot connected. So I could have a computer sitting there, and I could have a number of different GUI buttons and also fields. I could type in, hey, I want this to run 5 cycles, 10 cycles. I want it to run for 20 minutes. Whatever the case is. I'm going to try it one more time by hitting rectangle, and it should come back the other way. Now I will tell you that you'll get yourself in trouble a little bit, and you may have to be a little bit careful on the coding, but you can't hit rectangle twice because essentially you're trying to launch the same code within the same code, and that will error out. So really I only get one choice. I'm running rectangles or I'm running squares. And we'll go back to the other side. So hopefully that seems to make sense for you guys. And for this week's lab, let me stop and I could even have a stop here as well, by the way. If I wanted to have if I wanted to quit everything, I could just stop the robot altogether. But let's take a look at the lab for this week. So lab for this week, and apparently I don't have it open. That's fine. Now let's go into documents, ING 4250, there it is. And let's look at your lab, 6-axis lab. Here we go. All right. So, I'll give you one example for the pre-lab here. Describe at least 3 examples of a GUI interface in everyday life. I'll give you one. Walking up to an ATM machine. So you're walking up to the ATM, TCF, and you want to get money out. That is a graphical user interface. And it doesn't have to be a big touchscreen, but most of them are now for ATMs, right? But that's just one example in everyday life. So I'm going to ask you guys to come up with 3 other examples of graphical user interfaces, HMIs, in everyday life. What is the difference between a button and a radio button? I think we kind of defined that earlier, so I don't need to go over that again. And then what is the purpose of the following instruction? Apparently I made this too easy because this is exactly the instruction we just did a few minutes ago, I believe. So I'll let you guys define that. But make sure you define everything that's happening here. What does it mean for click button? What does it mean for quit rectangle? What does it mean for execute square? What does it mean for f end? what do those different things mean and what are they actually doing? So for the lab activity for this week, what you're going to do is you're going to put a square and a rectangle inside your work cell. And I'm not going to be real picky. You can move them around wherever you want. I can tell that you've done a rectangle and a square. I don't need to have the rectangle in the precise position. But you need to put those into your work cell like we're showing below. Program the robot to trace the edge of the rectangle, and that'll be a subroutine in your main code called rectangle, and then the square, which will be a subroutine in your main code called square. Use the GUI builder to create a form from where the user can execute either the square or rectangular path, and that's what you see right here. This is what's going to pop up when I want to go run it. I can hit rectangle and it'll do this one, or I can hit square and then it'll go trace out this one. This is going to be too easy, I think. So use the GUI builder form to create the form and then execute either of the paths. Comment your code, ensure the code meets the steps above. Save the following files and email them to your instructor. So what I need, obviously, is the Word file and with your questions, your pre-labs answered, the Notepad file with your main code, the Notepad file with your GUI program. When I say the Notepad file with those things, what I'm really talking about is getting this data, right, your main code into a Notepad and your GUI code within a Notepad, right? As soon as I know that this is a button or this is a label, I can call it from whatever my buttons and labels are. I don't need to have your actual GUI screen to know what that is. All right. And then your Excel file with your point data. And between those four things, I'll have enough to give you a grade on this. And you guys should be off and running. So I hope that this gives you an opportunity to play a little bit more with the 6-axis robot and a little bit more of the advanced functionality of some of the things that we haven't touched yet, either on SCARA or 6-axis. But it kind of relates back to some of the things that maybe you've done with HMIs and PLCs. Very similar idea. And as usual, if you guys have any questions at all, do not hesitate to reach out to me. Thanks.